Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and other fortunes, affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Sumner Sambo. Coming up in the next 60 minutes. As Americans head to the polls to settle the most divisive contest in decades, close to 100 million people in the U.S. voted before Election Day. Today, Americans are deciding between President Donald Trump and Democrat Joe Biden, selecting a leader to steer a nation battered by a surging pandemic that has killed more than 231,000 people, cost millions their jobs, and reshaped daily life. Both candidates have been appealing to voters in key battleground states. So can Joe Biden win this ballot as the poll suggests? Or can Donald Trump eke out the narrowest of victories as his supporters hope? We have analysis. And later, against the backdrop of the NSAS protests, some Nigerians said there's a shortcoming in the nation's democracy and are calling for the urgent need to re-engineer politics to make governance work for the people. For them, some of the key issues that hinder democratic development in the country are the absence of a productive and politically literate, empowered and engaged voting population, the dominant culture of a political class. Today we will speak to a member of the Fix Politics Initiative. Coming up. President Donald Trump and Democrat Joe Biden are battling for votes in states like North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Florida, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Michigan, all key battleground states in hopes of adding it to their electoral vote total. Polls began opening Tuesday as election officials warned that millions of absentee ballots could slow the tallies, perhaps for days in some key battleground states. These warnings come as President Donald Trump threatened legal action to prevent ballots from being counted after Election Day. At least 98.8 million people have voted before Election Day, about 71% of the nearly 139 million ballots cast during the 2016 presidential election. Legal experts and political analysts alike are urging patience, warning America may not know which presidential candidate emerges victorious on the election night.
I think we're likely not going to get a clear winner on election night, but that's different from not having a clear winner. The fact that it's taking a little bit longer this year doesn't mean that the system is broken. It actually just means the system is working. It means we're giving people who are counting the ballots time to count the ballots.
That's not a sign of our system failing us. That's not a sign of this election somehow being a failure. What would actually be a failure would be if we failed to count legitimately cast ballots simply because of some arbitrary cutoff of some time on election night or maybe the morning thereafter. What the law requires, what basic democratic norms require, is that we count the legitimately cast ballots. And if that takes a couple days this time, especially because we're in the midst of a pandemic that's unfortunately still raging in this country and leading more people to vote by mail-in ballot than in previous cycles, that's just fine. The arguments we've heard from Donald Trump about this election, they are not legal arguments. They are simply disinformation. The notion that if we don't know the winner on election night, something wrong has happened, or we need to go with whoever seems to be leading, that is not a legal argument that would win in front of any federal judge appointed by a president of any major party in any court in this country. It's not true. It's not consistent with our traditions. It's not what the law says.
I think we'll actually know by the weekend, by a few days after Election Day, even in the states with large absentee ballots that they're not used to and that can't start counting before Election Day itself. States like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, which will have far more volume of mail ballots than they're used to, and they won't be able to start the count until later than they should. That's going to mean it's going to take a little while. That's also going to require patience from us.
Well, for more on this, we cross live to New Jersey, where our correspondent Rotimi Michael Kadi has been monitoring the ballots. Nice to be with you, Rotimi. And we just want you to bring us to speed as to what's going on election day. Where have you been able to go to actually monitor the elections, and what's voting like wherever you are?
Thank you, Sumner. Elections is already, taking a better shape than it was 4 years ago. I recall that more than 50% voters have already casted votes, either via ballots or absentee ballot, or perhaps maybe voted early. So what we are seeing right now is more or less like a remnant of people, perhaps undecided voters who are going to cast their ballots come what may. It's actually a very cold season right now, and people are defying that and making that final pitch of their constitutional rights. For most of the few ballots poll booths that I went to this morning, we have relatively low numbers, and as I said earlier, because a lot of people have either voted via mail or perhaps have voted much earlier than today. So, but notwithstanding, there are a lot of things to be considered. There have been a lot of discussions about whether the election is going to be credible enough for it to be accepted. But of course, as you heard analysts that say that the elections in the U.S. have been almost accurate. If you have any malfeasance, it's going to be like less than 1%. And that is the battle that a lot of people are actually facing in this election cycle, ensuring that every vote in this election actually counts.
Mail-in ballots. Why do we have some persons preferring to go for in-person voting rather than mail-in ballots? I mean, there was this Democrat I was reading about who was scared that using the mail-in ballots, he may not be sure if his vote will eventually count because of the fears expressed by President Donald Trump. Just bring us to speed on those issues and how that may define this election.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of conversation around the post office. The president has casted a lot of aspersions about the authenticity or the accuracy of the mail-in ballots. The president sometimes said that most of the requested ballots have been found in unwarranted places, and there could be a possibility of rigging, which a lot of people disagreed with the president on that. But again, the post office has been having a little bit of technical issues ever since, and people are not trusting this post office operations again, and that's why they believe that they have to go in person to actually cast their ballots, because it's very important. In some states, if your ballot doesn't get to the election commission, it's definitely not going to be counted. So a lot of people are having issues with that, and the reason why they are going to perhaps double check whether their mail-in ballots have been sent. If they received it at the election commission of each state, definitely you won't have the opportunity to vote again. The possibility that there could be double voting it's almost impossible. And that's what a lot of people, the fears that a lot of people have reason why they're going to the polls themselves, some much earlier than today, some today, and making sure that their votes count.
Now, are there fears of Russian interference, just like we had in 2016? I mean, when Americans were actually shocked to hear that the Russians had, in one way or the other, interfered in their polls. Do you think, with what you've been saying, Americans actually trust their system not to be interfered with this time around?
Just about 2 weeks ago, the director of National Intelligence actually came out with the director of FBI expressing confidence in the system that, unlike 2016, where there was overwhelming evidence that Russia actually interfered in the elections, that in 2020, the chances are very, very kind of limited. and almost impossible for it. They've also expressed that not just Russia, some other countries like China and Iran have also tried to break into the electoral system, and they've seen all those threats, from the foreign powers as an affront on the U.S. election, because the U.S. One of the reasons why it's called a superpower is because of the strength and the accountability and transparency of its ballot. So putting a dent on it by trying to interfere is obviously one of the things they won't want to repeat, wanted to repeat itself in 2020. But again, everything is all hands on deck, as I believe from some of the people that I heard from in the State Department, that they will definitely attack any possibilities of getting into the electoral system. So, but I think that's absolutely not the issue right now. Unlike 2016, by this time there've been a lot of infiltration into the system, but so far so good. We've not heard any significant interference in the elections in each of the states.
All right, why is Trump building an unscalable fence alongside with other businesses? Is there fear that there may be post-election violence in the U.S., like we've seen a lot of apprehension among store owners and all of that, big businesses and all of that?
The president has, first of all, expressed fears about the elections, that the only way he could lose this election is when it's rigged. And some of the supporters are not taking it very lightly. They definitely avow that they would stand with the president, and most likely it has raised a lot of significant fear about what will happen next, should in case the victory doesn't go alongside the president. But again, that has also increased the anxiety that what possibly will happen if the president doesn't win. So if you look at some of the businesses within this tri-state area, like New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, they've been boarding up their businesses, which means they've been raising fences or books, and making sure that should in case there's anything after the elections, their stuff will be, their products and their commodities will definitely be protected. We saw what happened during the Black Lives Matter movement some months ago, where looters actually took advantage of the volatile situation, and they looted stores and destroyed so many property. Even police were also one of the biggest casualties in that. But again, this is a very critical, perhaps maybe one of the most important elections at this time. But not to worry, the executive talking about the police departments in each state have actually beefed up security in some of the downtown areas where there could be a possible fallout.
Thanks so much, Rotimi Kade, who is reporting for Arise News right from New Jersey. We want to thank you for that excellent report. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we continue our analysis on the U.S. election as Americans cast their votes to choose the president for the next 4 years. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Sumner Sambo. Americans are voting in one of the most divisive presidential elections in decades, pitting incumbent Republican Donald Trump against his Democratic challenger, Joe Biden. The first polls opened from 05 Eastern Time in Vermont. Nearly 100 million people have already cast their ballots in early voting, putting the country on course for its highest turnout in a century. Both rivals spent the final hours of the race rallying in key swing states. And to be elected president, a candidate must win at least 270 votes in what is called the Electoral College. But there are fears that pockets of post-election violence could break out as the results come in. Well, for his considered analysis of the U.S. election, I'm joined now in the studio by our special correspondent, Carl Bostic. Good to have you, Carl.
Good afternoon, Sumner.
Yeah, so just bring us to speed on what's happening. The latest right now is that President Donald Trump is hosting about 400 guests in anticipation of victory on election night. What are your views and your thoughts on that?
Well, it doesn't matter really what my views are. I think it's just what the prognosis is of the forecasters. And the ultimate poll that matters, Sumner, are the people who vote. The people who vote on election day, but already we've seen people voting ahead of election day. In fact, what we can show you, Sumner, of what posters are now saying for their final forecast of this election right now. I think we have a map to show you that just shows you what that breakdown is in electoral votes. If you can see that map right now, this map that we're looking at, what it says is this. It says that as of today, Joe Biden, he is on course, Sumner, to win 291 electoral votes. 270 needed to win. He's on course on the path to victory. Donald Trump with the 125. The blue is for Democrat, blue is for Joe Biden, the red is for Republican, for Donald Trump. So that's the path we're looking at right now, Sumner, which is incredible.
And irrespective of what Donald Trump is already planning, what should Joe Biden be doing at this moment?
Well, actually, Joe Biden, he's going to hold his fire and hold his powder, because he's going to wait and see just what's mathematically lining up. But let's just look at what's happened so far, up to date so far. Let's look at just the numbers of the early voting that you were talking about. We've got some numbers to show you that just explain how historical this is.
I mean, that's phenomenal. Close to about 100 million voters.
That's right, Sumner. 97.6. That's more than 2/3 of the number of votes cast in the entire election from 4 years ago. So this is dramatic by itself. But if you break it down, Sumner, that's what's also really key. But that's also why there's so much uncertainty. If you go further and look closer at these numbers, what we can see is what makes up those 98 million votes. Let's go to the next set of numbers if we can, if we have that to show you. We can see that 35 million people voted in person. 62 million people have already cast their ballots by mail. So that's
and that's a major challenge, actually. Donald Trump is having issues with the mail-in ballots, and he's like, I'm going to challenge all of this.
Well, you know why he has major challenges with it? Let's look even more closely about the kinds of people who vote early. We have another set of numbers to show you to make that point why they are concerned. If we can show you those numbers, which is a breakdown by party. Well, that's in terms of a breakdown by party, but before I'm getting ahead of myself. We've got states which have exceeded their turnout in 2016, like Texas, 107%. Georgia, 93.9%, down to Arizona, 92.9%. The point being, Sumner, so many states are just so energized by voting early for lots of reasons, ranging from the coronavirus pandemic to how strongly they feel about Donald Trump or against Donald Trump, to just even worries about delays in the mail. But we'll look at the next set of numbers that we can show you, Sumner, which show a different set of numbers for the important, crucial swing states. Swing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio. These are states, they did vote early, Sumner, but not as many, barely half in Pennsylvania, barely 40%. Wisconsin a little bit better, that's an important swing state, and Michigan as well. That's why we don't know who's going to show up to vote today. But finally, to get to your question, let's look at the final set of numbers about what kinds of people vote early. And that's why there's concern amongst the Republicans and Donald Trump. Because what we know is this, of the 20 states that report party registration, 45%, Sumner, are registered Democrats, 30% registered Republicans, historically, traditionally. And that's why today is going to be a big stampede, Sumner, because you're going to see the vast majority of people showing up to vote as being Republicans. The question becomes, though, Sumner, will there be enough of those people to show up to vote to make a difference for Donald Trump in the key states that matter when he's trailing so badly?
Well, the assurances you have just given to us right now, with the hopes of Joe Biden actually getting 291 electoral college votes, were given similarly in 2016, yet Hillary lost. How do we reconcile this?
Well, we can reconcile it by looking at what's kind of changed in the past 4 years. I think we've got, again, a set of numbers to show you about what's changed in the 4 years since amongst battleground states. What we can see, for example, Arizona, this year Biden's up by nearly 3 points. Trump won it by 3.5 points back in 2016. Florida, that's a key state to watch, Sumner.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the states that's been in the news a lot.
Well, it's in the news because not only is it vote rich with 29 electoral votes, Sumner, but because they start counting the ballots early, we may know the results of Florida as early as late tonight, around maybe 11. For example, in 2016, they called the election for Donald Trump at 11 p.m. Eastern time. So if Florida goes to Biden, and right now it's up by 2 or 3 points, but that's statistically a tie. When we compare it to 2016, when Hillary Clinton was expected to win, and Trump won it by just a few 100,000 votes, that could be it. That could be game over. That's what's happened. That's how much has changed. But let's look at a few more states if we could, Sumner, just to
Yeah, I mean, just while you're looking at that, why is Florida always controversial? Right from the year 2000, I mean, we had Al Gore and Bush, and it was more of a controversy that had to end up at the Supreme Court.
It's a very big state.
Why is it always
It's a very
controversial?
big state, and it's a very complicated state. So when I say it's a big state, I'm not being facetious. It's got a high population, 29 for votes, but it's a complicated, makeup of population. You've got, a large number of senior citizens who are diehard Republicans. You have a growing Latino population, but it's not just Latino. It's Cuban American, it's Puerto Rican American, and it's other Hispanics. Cuban Americans are, diehard Republicans. And then you've got the Black Americans. The Black Americans are not monolithic either. You've got Black Americans who are in the Deep South, but you also have, Sumner, Caribbean Black Americans as well. Black Americans, by and large, do vote Democrat, but the problem is there's always been a reduced turnout from blacks and Latinos. They've been kind of apathetic or indifferent. They've always felt their vote didn't matter. Well, that kind of mindset helped drive the result of 2016, where they didn't turn out to vote, right there. So again, we've got some more states to show you if we can do that.
Yeah, just go ahead. Go ahead, Carl.
Well, again, what we're looking at right now, I believe, is...
All right, that's Joe Biden. We're
Well, Joe Biden's going to have a very interesting day. I'll tell you why, Sumner, because, Donald Trump...
Well, you have the graphics back.
Okay, I'll talk about both. I'll talk about the states, I'll talk about Joe Biden. Georgia's a deep red state. Donald Trump won up by 5 points back in 2016. Joe Biden's up by 1. Iowa's a deep red state. Trump won by 1. And this time, in 2016, he won by 9 points. In Michigan, Trump won by 0.2%. Joe Biden's up by 8 points. And similarly, Minnesota. The point, though, I'm making is this. Even if you factor in all the mistakes that were made by pollsters 4 years ago, that's not enough to overcome these numbers. And that's why, depending on who turns out today to vote, they have a steep hill to climb. And that's also why, this time, the Democrats have said they're not going to take any chances. If the mathematics add up, for example, if they win states like Florida, Arizona, and we've got other states to show you as well if we can go to these other states.
Yeah, we're actually approaching the break right now, so we'll come back to it later. Just go ahead. Go ahead.
If these numbers keep adding up the way they do with the states that we see, if we can show you some more states, Sumner, what we're looking at is, we're looking at Joe Biden later tonight actually addressing the nation if he's confident that they're going to win, if they have the math on their side. If they're winning states like Nevada, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Ohio, which he's favored to win. That's what's so incredible. Finally, if we look at the next slide, we'll see what could be the real surprise. And again, keep in mind, these are not states that he has to win. Pennsylvania is really very big. The problem with Pennsylvania, Sumner, is because of their voting rules, every state has their own voting rules. They don't start counting ballots, even the early ballots, until after the polls have closed. Or that is to say...
And why is that? Very quickly.
It's a state law. It's a state law. That's why it may be delayed. But Texas is the real surprise, because Texas has been Republican historically, and with their votes, and it's not statistically a dead tie with Biden and Trump. If Texas goes to Biden, that's a landslide.
That would be historical.
It's a landslide, and we'll be talking President Biden by early tomorrow morning. There is that possibility. For Donald Trump, he can still mathematically win, but he has to really overcome all of those odds. He has to have a record turnout of Republican voters today. That is the non-college educated white person.
All right, just stay with us.
But additionally, challenges legally, too.
All right, just hold your thoughts there, Carl. We'll soon be back to actually look at these issues. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we continue our analysis on the U.S. election as Americans cast their votes to choose the president for the next 4 years. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Sumner Sambo. In the U.S. election, voters decide state-level contests rather than an overall single national one. National polls give a firm lead to Mr. Biden, but it is a closer race in the states that could decide the outcome. An uncommon fear and anxiety mark this U.S. election day. A report from the International Crisis Group, a global think tank headquartered in Brussels, lays out 3 broad categories of risk: armed violence, efforts to delegitimize or disqualify mail-in ballots, and fight over deadlines for counting votes. They include the country's politics being polarized along racial and identity lines, the rise of armed groups with political agendas, and the possibility of a contested outcome. And I still have with me in the studio our special correspondent, Carl Bostic. Good to have you once again, Carl. Let's talk about the Electoral College and why the popular votes in recent times have not elected the U.S. president like it happened in 2016.
Well, the thing about it, Sumner, is that there is a growing consensus that the Electoral College is outdated. It goes back to the founding of America. You're talking more than 200 years ago. I mean, it's enshrined in the Constitution. At the time when it was first established, it was to protect the rights of those smaller states when the country was founded, smaller states with small populations against states with big populations. And so the idea was, with Congress composed of both the Senate and the House of Representatives, each state, no matter how big or small it was, each state would only have 2 senators. That's the Senate. The House of Representatives would have congressmen based on the numbers of the population. So, for example, if you were a state with, big like New York or Pennsylvania, you'd have, X number of people. But a smaller state, maybe like Delaware, would just have, again, maybe 1 congressman. So each state would have the combined sum of senators plus congressmen. And when you add it all up, Sumner, what you have a grand sum of 538 electoral votes. They represent the number of congressmen in Congress today. The 100 congressmen in the Senate, 100 senators in the Senate, and 435 in the House. The other 3 seats come from territories, like Puerto Rico, for example. So that's it right there. So depending on the popular vote, whoever wins the popular vote, by each state, their electors then will vote for the candidate. So even though Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, it wasn't enough to win the electors, and that's why Donald Trump won.
And let's talk about the role of the coronavirus in all of these U.S. Campaigns, which led to the election day today. How do you think COVID-19 will play a crucial role in determining the number of voters that will show up to vote in person today? Well,
you've really already answered your question, Sumner, because this will always be known as the pandemic election or the coronavirus election. I mean, look at the debates. One reason why you have so much early voting going on, because people were worried about the safety and the risk of showing up at the polls all at once on election day. That's why you had not only expanded periods for early voting, but you also had expanded periods to begin the processing of the ballots. That's what happened there. But more importantly to your question, Sumner, right now, the U.S. is now in the grips of a 3rd wave of infections. You're talking about more than 9 million infections, more than 230,000 deaths. And while Donald Trump would like to say that it's rounding the corner or that it's disappearing, there's no end in sight. It's not under control. And more disturbingly, people are basically judging his handling of it as a major reason why they're unhappy with him. In other words, they see a failed response. Joe Biden's strategy is all about making the election about a referendum on how did Donald Trump as president manage this crisis. No one's blaming him for the onset of coronavirus, but it was the response that was delayed, and also for not taking it seriously. When maybe safeguards could have been in place, and looking at his rallies, they see it as being very irresponsible. They become super spreader events. And so, for example, states like Wisconsin, which narrowly gave him the win back in 2016, Wisconsin is now a hot spot. And that's why, by one poll, nearly 17% of the people have swung towards Joe Biden. But then to get to your point about the impact of coronavirus, it's had so many ramifications because it's affected the economy. It's sent the economy into the recession. You have record numbers of joblessness, more than 20 million people. So there's an economic recovery aspect to it as well. But also, again, to get to 2 key niche groups affected by the coronavirus, women. Women are especially upset about what it's doing to their households, their children being able to go to school, and they see his mishandling of that as a major factor why you have this now historical gender gap. You almost have, in some cases, at least a 20-point swing between going from Trump to Biden. Back in 2016, Sumner, Donald Trump won the majority of female voters. More than 50%. Now it's swung about 17 to 20 points for Joe Biden. That's why you have Donald Trump, literally pleading, begging women, saying, please give me your votes, suburban woman. I'll make your neighborhood safer. But right now, they don't feel like their homes are safer. Because
and one thing, Carl, sorry to just interrupt. Yesterday, I saw those food bags, being distributed by Trump and all of that. I mean, it made many of us here to feel, the U.S. is turning into like a third world country, where you have, voters being induced with food and all of that. Why would that be happening under a Trump presidency?
Well, I think that's also part of this perception right there, because people feel as though here you've got the world's wealthiest country, 4% of the world's population, Sumner, and yet accounting for 25% of the fatalities of coronavirus. What's going on there? You've got developed countries ranging from South Korea to Japan to Germany, which have done, a much, much more comprehensive job. While they are now experiencing second waves of the coronavirus, they're still managing it much, much better because they have a national strategy. For example, Donald Trump is against the national mandate for face masks. He doesn't practice social distancing. Look at what
he's
his rallies.
Saying about Dr. Anthony Fauci and all of that.
He's promised that he'll fire him, perhaps, if he's reelected after the election.
And what's the possibility of that actually happening?
He's the president.
And will there be safeguards for Dr. Anthony Fauci?
He's the president. He can fire whoever he wants, but it's just whether it's politically palatable or not. It would not look well just before the election right now, because the overriding concern for Americans, they're worried about a virus for which there's no vaccine, that's out of control, that's impacted the economy. You have more than 20 million people without jobs. You have states like Wisconsin, for example. In fact, many of the surge of the coronavirus is happening in the red states that are typically Republican. The latest surge of coronavirus is happening in the battlefield states that Donald Trump needs to win.
And that may affect his votes.
Well, if he's trying to tell them, don't worry about the virus, when meanwhile, you've got people in these red states, they're seeing their own members of the family getting sick, or loved ones who might have succumbed to it and unfortunately passed away. They're saying, is this the kind of leader that we want? And so as much as Donald Trump tries to change the narrative about one of economic recovery, saying, I'm the one who can bring the economy back to what it used to be. I'm the one who can create new jobs. I'm the one who can make...
he's been talking about this, that there's been a lot of economic growth, but that the media seems to be biased, not reporting on that. They're just focusing on COVID everywhere. So do you think the media has actually been biased in reporting some of this economic growth within the U.S. economy?
Well, to be truthful, I think, the media is now, realizing that this is the delicate matter. When you're dealing with the president, you've got to cover whatever the president does because he's making news. But in this case, the president's also the candidate. But they've never dealt with a president who basically gives so many, shall we say, untruths or outright lies. And yet, if you're carrying it live, and he's got an incredible social media following, he's got nearly 80 million plus followers on his social media feeds, like Twitter, for example. And so it was only until recently that they actually put warnings and red flags when he was saying things along the lines that any vote that's counted after election day is liable to be a fraudulent vote. Ideas like that. So he's constantly feeding misinformation to cast doubt. That's part of the strategy right there. Saying, if I don't know the results tonight, don't be so sure that those results are legitimate or valid.
Yeah, and it brings me to the preparation is already putting in place. He has 400 guests lined up for victory party tonight and all of that. But why is Donald Trump building an unscalable fence within the White House? Do you think he's afraid of a mob besieging the White House? And then why are U.S. businesses also, building these unscalable fences? Is the fear of post-election violence very real in the U.S.?
Well, I think what's really interesting, Sumner, is this. One of the reasons why the U.S. is held up as a model and a hallmark of democracy around the world, because for more than 200 years, nearly 250 years, it's been marked by continual peaceful transfers of power from election to election to election. This is one of the rare occasions, you have to go far back as the Civil War, which is more than 150 years ago. This is one of the rare occasions where instead of so much attention being paid to a peaceful transfer of power to whomever wins the next election, there's more attention being paid to the violence and unrest that can transpire not only today, Sumner, but also in the days and weeks to come, especially if there's uncertainty. Because again, you have to keep in mind that the period of time between Election Day and inauguration, January 20th, is 70 plus days. If these results are not known within the next day or two, and there's uncertainty there, you can bet, and that's part of the strategy for the Republicans, that votes will be contested in any state where the vote is close. And in any state where the vote is close, that's the potential for unrest.
And let's look at the possibility of a tie, within both candidates in the Electoral College. Has there been any precedence to this? And what if it happens due to the very close nature of the polls?
Well, it's been close to a precedent to this, and there are provisions for this in the Constitution. But to be truthful, if this was a real possibility, you would have known about it now, and it would also show that the pollsters are not doing their job, and they'd be out of business. But the provision is such that if it does go to a tie, it would go to the House of Representatives in Congress, and they would be the ones to decide the next president. And yet, that's still on the table. That's a scenario. That's really a Hail Mary from Donald Trump.
Well, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be preparing for a loss because, I mean, like I told you earlier, he's invited about 400 guests to the White House and is already preparing for an election victory.
Well,
based on what he said, I mean, yesterday when he talked about 4 states, he was like, the crowd of supporters he saw around doesn't give him an impression that he's going to lose.
Unlike 2000, Sumner, which is interesting, you may recall when it was so close it came down to Florida and those Chad votes, people probably forget about it, and it went to the Supreme Court. At that time, Al Gore, who was the contestant, he held back. He let the courts decide. But some say that was a tactical error, that he should have gone on the airwaves saying that, I believe I should be the president, so on and so forth. Tonight, already, the Biden campaign manager has said yesterday, listen, if we know that mathematically we have this election and it does look good, this is without even counting Florida, Pennsylvania, Joe Biden will be addressing the country tonight.
All right.
In anticipation of being the next president.
Let's even take a look at Joe Biden's presidency. Assuming he wins tonight, what do you think Joe Biden is actually going to mean to the rest of the world? Just in 1 minute.
Well, just keep in mind, he's already spent 8 years as vice president to Barack Obama. So he has a pretty good idea of how the White House works. He has a transition team made up of hundreds of people where his first priorities will be to tackle the coronavirus, to have an economic recovery plan, and in terms of foreign policy, to start undoing what Donald Trump's doing. He wants to rejoin WHO, he wants to join the Paris Climate Accord, and revisit a way to try to bring Iran back to the table, to make it more accountable for its nuclear program. So you're going to see a lot of effort to try to undo what's been done in the past 4 years by the Donald Trump presidency.
Just very quickly before we go on this short break, tell us about the Senate and House of Representatives seats. I mean, we've got 35 Senate seats and 435 House of Reps seats, all for grabs. What's going on between these elections with the main presidential election?
It would be very historic, Sumner, because the way the polls go right now, it looks like he's in very good position to flip the Senate, and the Democrats will actually increase their lead in the House Republicans. Why is this important? Because this means that if it's Joe Biden in the White House and he's got the Senate and the House of Representatives under Democrat control, that means he can do whatever needs to be done legislatively without any pushback from Republicans. It means that a lot can be accomplished in a very rapid, swift manner, and it will make it a very, very powerful presidency.
All right, thank you for that excellent analysis, Carl Bostic. We would like to just wait patiently, just like the Americans, for the results to be out. You're watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Sumner Sambo. And against the backdrop of the NSAS protests, some Nigerians say there's a shortcoming in the nation's democracy and are calling for the urgent need to re-engineer politics to make governance work for the people. In their fixed politics research findings, they concluded that every democracy, including that of Nigeria, can function well when it stands on 3 triangulated pillars of empowered and engaged citizens who vote rationally for candidates that can effectively run the government on their behalf, ethical, competent, and capable politicians who compete for votes by presenting citizens with alternative plans of how they will govern on their behalf, and credible institutions that include constitutional, political, and electoral bodies to regulate the relationship between citizens and politicians. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Indi Kato, a member of the work study group of Fixed Politics Initiative. Glad to have you, Indi.
Thank you for having
Yeah,
me.
let's talk about fixing Nigeria and what you're focusing on politics generally. What exactly are the specific things we need to do to revamp the politics of our country so that we do not focus only on the means of getting to office, but what the office can do for the people?
You know, there's a funny thing about the political conversation in Nigeria. It's never going back to what the politician can do, like the result of the election, the deliverables that you want after the election. So when you actually go into elections, there's several conversations, but never really about this is what, you know, attaching governance to the electoral process, to elections. It's almost like there's detachment. What are we seeking to do with fixed politics, NG? With fixed politics, it is that we need to bring the electorate to the table. Lots of the times, these conversations hold on a certain level, and we need to understand what the critical mass of Nigerians are, and make them understand that, look, there's a straight line between this politics that is played, that has become, it is a lifestyle actually at rural areas, let's say that, but it's just that that lifestyle is not attached to governance and the results that politics is supposed to give you. And so we're educating the electorate, letting them know that, look, you have the power, you need to know what this is really about, and that the major thing about this process is that it needs to deliver results, and those results need to favor you.
Yeah, and one we want to ask, what are the shortcomings that you have recognized as inhibiting, you know, good governance?
Oh, of course, if you look at, you know, the document from Fixed Politics, and let me just freestyle it, but there is a specific issue, and it's monopolistic politics. And why do we have that?
What do you mean by that?
It is that this is a system where there are no consequences. This is a system where the politician has all the power. How does he have all the power? Whether a politician fails to deliver or not, there are no consequences. It's like the masses have no say. We have no say. They have found a system that keeps them perpetually in power, whether or not they perform, whether or not they do the right thing, whether or not they are presentable candidates. Now, this kind of system cannot produce for you governance, good governance. Why? Because there are no incentives. And when there are no incentives for good governance, why would somebody who has already created a system, keep in mind that when good governance, when there are incentives, it's kind of like a cycle. You know that you have to keep a certain character to get in here. You know that you have to deliver. And then when you deliver, people would say, he has delivered, and these are the metrics we have measured, and then they bring you back. But when these are not there, and there is another method, which I've of course mentioned, that keeps you in there, there's no incentive for you to perform. The incentives for staying in politics in Nigeria is of course not performance or delivering to the Nigerian populace what it is they deserve and what can move Nigeria to the next level. And so once we get rid of this, once we're able to attach, again, consequences to Nigerian politics, attach, you know, create a system that ensures that there are consequences, there are metrics for measurement. You can judge your politician and say, this is what they have performed, this is what they have been able to do, this is what we want, this is how beneficial it is to all of us. Our voices are heard. This is where the power lies. And that is it. The electorate do not have that power right now, let's be very honest.
And when you said the electorate doesn't have that power, one wonders, I mean, during election days, we all come out, see a lot of Nigerians voting and all of that, some even safeguarding their votes. What usually happens is that the electorate sometimes may look like they get fixated with the festival nature of the elections. And then once politicians are elected into public office, they hands off and they leave the politicians to just do their thing.
It brings it back to my point, yeah.
What will you be recommending as a change of attitude for the electorate, and then as specific things that should be done maybe by the National Assembly to change the political nature of our politicians so that they would divert away from politics to governance?
For the National Assembly, what we need are electoral reforms. Electoral reforms ensure that people, you know, new players, people who have something to offer, and we have seen it over time. You know, over time, people who have decided to take the angle of good governance when they have the option to serve in government actually do not get that very far, because the system just does not, the system, you know, takes out those kind of people. And so what we're looking to do now is, with respect to this, one of those pillars, of course, is reforms. And reforms, the National Assembly plays a very key role in those electoral
And have
reforms.
you made representation?
Of course, several.
The National Assembly?
Yes, now.
What specific areas, for example, of the Electoral Act are you hoping that will be changed as we move forward?
Well, again, with respect to the Electoral Act, one of the major things that we're looking at is the money politics. And it's very tricky because, one thing with Nigerian politicians is we can have this past, but implementation is very key. Sincerity in implementation is very key. But let's come back to that. Looking at how expensive for a poor country, let's be very realistic about what Nigeria is and what our fortunes are at the moment, how expensive for a poor country is that Nigerian elections are. And this actually prevents a lot of key players from getting into.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised, for example, when one study actually said for you to become president in Nigeria, you should have nothing less than 200 billion naira. So let's say between 200 to 500 billion.
It is that expensive.
And we keep wondering why that is so.
It is, it is that expensive, and this is something that we have to actively cut down. For me, that is like number one on my plate. Like, we have to look at this. When people see this as an investment, I'm putting the investment then becomes cash, not delivering what you're supposed to deliver to the populace. It becomes a big problem. So people invest during elections. You actually see people putting in and expecting that, look, when you enter. And it's the funny thing about the investment in Nigerian politics, it's not that, okay, this is a lobby group saying that they want to be able to implement these policies, this is what they stand for, or they stand for green energy. You know how sophisticated it gets out there? No, it is that I have contributed my money, and when you enter in there, we must bring out.
I need some return.
I need something in return, and that something in return is never tied to good governance.
Okay, as we try to round off this conversation, do you think that the NSAS was a kind of revolt against the system that has,
in
quotes, kept people, just like that, without them getting what we popularly call the dividends of democracy? So and how do you think that movement can actually translate into, for example, more youths getting into governance and then electing people who are accountable more?
A very good thing that the NSAS has done, the NSAS movement has done, has actually been to show that that fixed politics NG is actually an idea whose time has come. Because we have a lot of young people who came into the streets for a specific thing, but many people came uninformed, and then when they got into the streets, they started to understand. And so there's this peak, of political interest right now. Young people want to get involved, young people want to know. But there's a thing to want to know, and then the vacuum of feeling it and being there.
Yeah, I mean, how do you marry activism with politics? That's what, because you shouldn't just end at activism.
You do know that part of what fixed politics is trying to do is to achieve scale in actually training and creating a new political class. And so there is the technological act of the part of the training, and then there is, of course, the physical part of the training. But what is impressive here is that we're recognizing that there is a new political class coming up, and these people are tying politics to governance. They want key deliverables from this, and fixed politics is saying, look, we are going to try to achieve scale, and trying. I'm saying try because, of course, we have not gone in there, but I'm very positive, given again the key players, given how fast this movement has been able to come, and the dedication, and also looking at the fact that it is working with data and empirical evidence on where we are coming from and where it is that we are going. We need to create that. We need to create that scale. We need to understand that, look, there are a lot of people coming in here, and there is no time. We need to train these people, let them understand the reality on ground, and prepare them for what is to come in front.
Are you preparing people for political office in 2023?
Of course, it's an evolving movement. We are preparing for 2023 and even beyond. There are people on ground already, young people who have shown leadership, young people who, again, this is a mixture of all aspects, all spheres of society. But it is that, there is this convergence, and people are coming together and realizing that we need to prepare for now, but this is the short term. We will achieve between.
And how will they achieve that without money? Just in 30 seconds, because once you go to voters, they tell you, where's the money?
So again, engaging the electorate. This is an electorate. Again, we have said that these protest movements have actually created fertile ground for movements like fixed politics to actually take charge at this time. So we have voters who are ready, voters who are saying that, look, this money is not enough. We are starving, we are dying, and we want
we'll have to go right away.
Thank
you so much, Indikato of the Fixed Politics Nigeria. And we want to thank our earlier guest, Rotimi Kadi, our Rice correspondent from New Jersey in the US, and Carl Bostic, our Rice special correspondent, who has been with us, giving us this fantastic analysis on the US election day. Well, that's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Do join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.